tomorrow our yogis have to report their experience to meditation teachers. If we know how to report, it is good both yogis and meditation teachers. That's why this evening I will try to tell our yogis how to report their experience correctly. It is not so difficult to report your experience because you watch your body and your mind moment after moment. When you are trying to note whatever arises from the six sense doors, when you are able to note whatever arises from the six sense doors, you remember, you won't forget. So when you report your experience, you don't need to say any other things apart from your experience. At the beginning, when you report your experience, you should mention how many hours you practiced. You should mention briefly how many hours you practiced for one day. Then, how many times for sitting, how many times for walking, should describe. Meditation teachers know yogis, they follow the schedule, but they still want to know whether or not yogis follow the schedule. That's why you should describe how many times for walking meditation, how many times for sitting meditation, should mention. Yogis always report first sitting meditation, not walking meditation. When you report sitting meditation, you don't need to describe every sitting. Which sitting is good in your practice, you should choose maybe one sitting or two sitting. You don't need to describe every sitting. In the same way, when you report walking meditation, one or two walking practice, if you mention, that is enough. When you report sitting meditation, remember, you should describe the main object always. When you report every day, when you describe sitting meditation, mention first about main object, that is rising and falling of the abdomen. Should not think meditation teachers will get bored listening the rising, falling, every day. They are interested to listen how yogis note the main object. Do they note the main object closely or not? They want to know. That's why should describe the main object first whenever you report sitting meditation. When you practice sitting meditation, as you are instructed, you trying to pay close attention to the main object, then you note rising as rising, falling as falling. So when you pay close attention to the rising and falling of the abdomen, you might be able to note it closely. Then you have to tell, when I note rising, falling, I pay close attention to the abdomen. Note the rising, falling very carefully. You have to describe when you note it closely. Then what do you notice in it? We cannot notice immediately. You cannot notice, you may not notice something in the rising and falling of the abdomen immediately if you are beginner. Don't worry about that, what you notice. Meditation teachers want to know whether or not yogis could practice correctly. When you try to note the present object, one day, sooner or later, you would notice something. So when you notice something, you have to describe. For example, I note rising, falling carefully. I could note it. My mind could follow the movement closely. When I note rising, I notice the abdomen inflates. Then I note falling. When I note falling, I notice the abdomen deflates. I just use the word, but according to your experience, you can describe upward movement or downward movement or contracting or expanding. You can describe whatever way you experience, you notice. It doesn't matter. Sometimes yogis, they note very carefully, but they still do not notice. They think they can't see anything in the rising and falling. If you could not notice anything, you just simply say, I'm trying to note the rising and falling closely, but I can't see anything. As you may remember, one of the quality, yogi's quality is honesty. You have to say honestly what you have experienced. If you notice something, you should say, I noticed something. If you do not notice anything, you just say, I do not notice anything. But you should describe. Do you note the primary object carefully or not? You have to describe definitely. If you haven't experienced anything yet, it doesn't matter. Then estimate, not counting. When you are noting rising, falling, do not count. Rising, falling 1, rising, falling 2, rising, falling 3. Do not count. It's not necessary to count. But estimate, should describe. I could note rising, falling a few times, or 1 minute, or 2 minutes, or 3 minutes, according to your experience. If you are very careful noting the rising, falling, you would notice how it is difficult, how it is easy. You might understand. So, what you have truly experienced, you should explain. Do not jump into other objects without describing the primary object. The primary object is very important. If you are able to note the primary object closely, other things become easy because your mindfulness is quite strong. So yogis, especially the beginner yogis, they haven't got these qualities to be able to note the rising, falling for some time. Then after 2-3 times, or 1 minute, or 2 minutes, my mind went away. Or thoughts taking my mind away, as you understand. When the thoughts take your mind away, what do? According to your experience, you have to describe. Mostly, we could not catch, yogis could not catch the thoughts immediately. Mostly follow the thoughts. Thinking, wondering, imagining, planning, sometimes remember something, somebody criticizing. So these are the experiences yogis always have. So these are the things you have to describe. After noting the rising, falling a few times, my mind went away. If you could catch the thoughts immediately, you can say, I could catch the thoughts immediately. Then I note thinking. When I note thinking, what happened? Then thoughts still remain in your mind or disappear. You understand. When you note it, you understand. If you do not note it, you do not understand. You do not notice. Oh, I note the thoughts. Thinking, wondering, imagining, planning. Then they disappeared. The thoughts disappeared immediately. When the thoughts disappear, the noting mind come back to the primary object. Primary object. If you do not know the thoughts immediately, the thoughts still going on, the mind won't come back to the primary object. That's why we are instructed, when the thoughts occur in the mind, note it straight away. Try to note it. So just now I said, when the thoughts disappear, the noting mind comes back to the primary object. That is, some yogis, they mention in their report, I pull my mind back to the object. We have to remember, we don't need to pull our mind back to the main object. As you know, the meaning of vipassana, whatever arises from the 6 sense doors, must be aware of it. That is, when you see something, note seeing. When you hear something, note hearing. When you smell, you have to note smelling. When you eat, taste, you have to note tasting. When you touch, you have to note touching. When you think, you have to note thinking. This is the meaning of vipassana. But at the beginning of the practice, yogis do not have ability to note everything, whatever arises from the 6 sense doors. That's why we have the primary object. Primary object is the rising and falling of the abdomen. So when the mind is thinking, just note thinking. We don't need to pull it back to the primary object. So you have to be careful when you report. Then this is called Citta Nupassana. Whatever the mind thinks, note thinking, wondering, imagining. Just now I say Citta Nupassana. Also, yogis can make mistake. Some yogis, they say, I like to practice Citta Nupassana. So I ask that yogi, how do you practice Citta Nupassana? Oh, follow the thoughts. Follow the thoughts is not a Citta Nupassana. Because of the thoughts, these thoughts disturb our mind. That's why we cannot live peacefully. The Buddha also taught, Sarakawa Citta, Sarakawa Cittanti Pajanati. When there is the sensual thoughts appear in the mind, we have to know there is sensual thoughts in me. That is noting, taking note of it or observe it. So we must note thinking straight away. So this is a Citta Nupassana. Follow the thoughts is not a Citta Nupassana. So have to describe after noting the rising falling a few times. My mind went away, or thoughts take my mind away. I note thinking. When I note thinking, thinking disappeared. Then the mind come back to the rising and falling. I note rising, falling carefully. So you have described about Kaya Nupassana, contemplation of the body, the basic noting the rising and falling. You have mentioned Citta Nupassana, noting the thoughts. Because our yogis practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So when you report, you have to report these 4 foundations of mindfulness. You practice. Then when we practice sitting meditation, we have to sit still, try not to move, try not to change so often. So when we sit still, the feeling, unpleasant feeling, would arise sooner or later. If you are not used to sitting, the pain, unpleasant feeling would arise quickly, maybe after about 20 minutes or so. Mostly unpleasant feeling, pain, stiffness, hardness, pencil needle would arise somewhere in the body. So when the unpleasant feeling arises somewhere in the body, You don't need to note the rising, falling, because the feeling is clear in your mind. You have to note feeling, pain or whatever, as you feel. Then you have to describe this feeling. How do you cope with it? Do you note it closely? Yes, I note it closely. You may say so. When you note it closely, what do you notice? You should describe. Don't say just, I note pain. Do you note it closely? When you note it closely, what do you notice? If you could note closely, you might notice something in the pain. Maybe when you are noting the pain is getting stronger. I note the pain carefully. When I note the pain closely, I notice the pain is getting stronger and stronger and stronger. When you mention getting stronger and stronger, you notice it clearly. Not all the time getting stronger. Sometimes you also may experience getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Sometimes when you are noting a few times, the pain, the unpleasant feeling appears suddenly. Sometimes moving around. Sometimes stand still. These are the experiences. These are the noticings you have to describe. But you do not notice anything just now I mentioned. You want to change because of the strong feeling. When you want to change, what do? As you are instructed, you note it. Wanting to change, then changing. You note. This also should be described. These are your experiences about feeling you mentioned. So experienced yogis, they would describe more in detail. It is not necessary purposely you mentioned in details. If you really experience, if you really notice, you should describe. You should describe. For beginner yogis especially, do they note it when they occurs? Yes, they note. That's enough. Then yogis, they seldom mention about the senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling. They don't get smell all the time. But with imagination and the thoughts, they might see something or somebody. Then you note seeing. When you note seeing, you should describe. I notice, I see something in my thoughts. I note seeing. When you note seeing, what happened? It disappears or still going on according to your experience. You should describe. Then hearing, do you note it? You have to mention. Then eating mindfully, you have to mention. At the beginning of the practice, you should describe all the satipatthana, 4 satipathanas. Because teachers want to know, yogis, do they note all the 4 foundations of mindfulness? Then touching, you have to describe if you note it. So if you mention in this way, your report is quite good. quite good. It is very simple and very easy to report. Just now I just explain a bit detail. 3 things you should remember. These are the point. Appearing, noting, and noticing. Appearing or occur in the body. The rising, falling. When the rising, falling occur in the abdomen, the yogis note rising as rising, falling as falling. This is noting. When you note it closely, then you notice. You notice inflates or deflates or contracting or expansion or upward movement or downward movement. Downward movement. If you could describe all these 3 things, your report is perfect. But if you could not describe yet about what you notice, it doesn't matter. One day, you will notice something. If you are able to mindful, moment to moment for some time. But do not explain with imagination without experiencing, because when we report, because of these expression, we want to say something, sometimes with imagination. While we are practicing, even though we are told, do not expect anything, do not analyze anything, still we think, what should I know in the rising and falling? We expect. When we expect, it's not our true experience. That's why when we expect something, we have to note expectation. Do not search for anything to notice or to understand in the present object. We have to remember, our yogis have to remember, as the Buddha taught us, satima, be mindful. Be mindful moment to moment. So that is just bare mindfulness. Just bare mindfulness. When we are mindful on the object, we can notice automatically. That's why do not search for anything purposely. Do not analyze anything. Just be mindful closely or attentively and precisely. Precisely. This is a report for sitting meditation. When you finish sitting meditation, you can go on walking meditation. How do you practice walking meditation? We have to practice walking meditation for 1 hour. You can divide into 3 parts. First 20 minutes, the 1 step walking, right step, left step. The second 20 minutes, 2 steps walking, lifting, placing. The last 20 minutes, lifting, pushing forward, placing. Placing. But you don't need to be too slow all the time. When you get up from sitting, you can walk a bit faster, just normal walking, walking, or stepping for about 10 or 15 minutes, then slow down, trying to be mindful on your walking meditation. Remember, as you are instructed, when you practice walking meditation, don't look at anywhere. If you look at somewhere, your eyes would catch something, then put it in your mind. Then you cannot concentrate. That's why yogis should keep the eyes down always. Don't look at unnecessarily anywhere if you want to know something in the walking practice. Then right step, left step. Note carefully or attentively. The noting in walking step must synchronize. If the noting doesn't synchronize the walking step, you will not notice anything. So you have to remember. Then I practice one step noting, right step, left step. Have to describe whether or not your mind could follow the footstep closely. I try to note right step, left step, but my mind doesn't go to the step closely, could not follow the footstep closely, or my mind could follow the footstep closely. When you say your noting mind could follow the movement closely, you might notice something in the stepping. You should describe. Just now, as I said, noticing, appearing, noting is our duty, yogi's duty, must note it closely, must practice respectfully. Then, when the noting mind could follow the movement closely, yogis, they notice what they could notice. At least, movement. Then, in this way, you have to report. Not only one or two steps. When you practice walking meditation, not too far and not too short distance, you have to practice. Then one back and forth, I could follow the movement closely. Or during the walking, my mind went away. As you experience, you have to describe. Then in standing, do you note standing? Yogis mostly, they do not describe. When they stand, standing. You note standing. When you note standing, you have to describe. I note standing. When you note standing, what do you notice in it? You should describe. When I notice standing, I notice, for example, there is stiffness in my leg, there is hardness in my soul, or softness in my soul. You should describe, not just simply say, I note standing. Then, do you note turning? When you note turning, you have to turn mindfully and slowly. If you turn immediately, you will not notice anything. That's why we are instructed to behave like a sick person. The Buddha taught us. So we have to, if we want to gain something in the practice, we must follow the Buddha's instruction. We do not talk, just we share the knowledge the Buddha taught. The Buddha taught, atapi, we must put strenuous effort, put forth effort. Without putting forth effort, we can't gain anything in the practice. So if we want to gain something, we must follow the Buddha's teachings. So move slowly and mindfully. When you move slowly and mindfully, you might notice something in it. What do you notice? When I notice moving, I notice my body is moving. One after another, I notice. Oh, this is a noticing. You experience. If you do not notice anything, just simply say, I note it closely, but I still do not notice anything. To me, personally, I have to say to me, I do not expect yogis to notice immediately. I know how difficult it is. I think all the yogis know, very difficult if you are careful. Not easy to note the rising falling for 5 minutes. Is it easy to note the rising falling for 5 minutes without thinking? Is it easy? I think it is easy, that's why they keep quiet. Not easy. Last night also I told, not easy. The Buddha also taught. It is very difficult to control the mind because the mind is so quick and so fast. When I practiced meditation, noting the rising falling, very carefully because I was so afraid of the teacher. I practiced because other yogis, they could describe how they could know the rising falling. Their mind doesn't go anywhere because when we reported our experience to the teacher, we reported with the group. So some yogis, they practice for long time. They are very mindful, very impressive. They could report. To my time, whenever I report, I could not note rising falling for 1 minute, only a few times, 10 times, very difficult. Where my mind went, go to Abhabhama, paying respect to the Mahamuni Buddha. So, not easy to know the rising and falling. Not only the rising and falling, other things, object, not easy to note. That's why I do not expect yogis to say something what they notice. But I want to know whether or not they could practice meditation correctly or not. This is very important. You cannot practice meditation in a center for a long time. Here only about 2 weeks. Maybe at most you may practice about 1 month. You cannot practice all the time. After 2 weeks, you are going back home. So when you go back home, some yogis, they ask, what should I do when I go back home? So your meditation teacher suggests, practice for 1 hour every day, 2 hours every day. Could you practice meditation? You cannot. But if you know how to practice meditation correctly, you can practice anywhere. That's why I want the yogis to practice meditation correctly. If you can practice meditation correctly, it's enough for me. Then you will notice, you will experience the dhamma. If you could not practice meditation correctly, even though you practice for a long time, you cannot gain something because you do not know how to practice meditation correctly. So when you report your experience, don't worry if you do not describe what you notice, doesn't matter. But try to be mindful moment to moment. Bare mindfulness. Bare mindfulness. What should I say? You do it, you know it. Very simple. You do it, you know it. If you don't do it, you do not know it. You do it means you have to note it closely. When the rising and falling occur, you have to do it, or you have to aware of it, you have to take note of it. Then you will know it. You will know it, you notice it. Notice it. So this is a walking meditation. You don't need to describe in details at the beginning of the practice. I'm concerned about the beginner yogis, the experienced yogis. They know how to report. So after walking meditation, you describe sitting and walking meditation. If you still have the time, you should mention about daily activities, whether or not you note daily activities. You don't need to mention in details, because one yogi gives how many minutes? Sandu, how many minutes? 10 minutes. 10 minutes is quite a lot. Also, you have to take care of other yogis. Sometimes you may have many things to describe, but what is most important, you should describe. Other unnecessary things you don't need to mention. What is the most important things? The primary object is very important. Very important. Then about the pain, about the thoughts. If you have the time, you can describe about the seeing, hearing, smelling, or tasting in detail. You can describe. If you do not have the time, then you just simply say, in general. We also have to take care of other yogis. So these are the way how we report. If you report your experience systematically, save the time, then very easy to understand how the yogis make progress. Do not describe about daydreaming. Daydreaming is nothing in the practice. Should not describe. Also, should not describe your past experiences. We want to, the meditation teachers want to listen the present experience. Tomorrow you have to describe. Today you practice today's experience. You have to report tomorrow, not past experiences. Then, when the meditation teachers are free, you can request, you can discuss your past experiences. But during the practice, only fresh experiences should describe. So this is the way our yogis have to report tomorrow. Now I still have a few minutes. I want to tell about walking meditation. Just now I said we can divide 1 hour into 3 parts, 20 minutes. Not exactly, just roughly. One step walking, yogis do not note intention. In 2 steps walking, yogis they note intention, intending to lift, 2 or 3 times. Then lifting, then intending to put it down, putting down. Some yogis they practice in this way. When we are able to note the footstep closely, we notice intention. Even I think we don't need to note intention. When our mindfulness is very good, very strong, before we lift our foot, there is intention. Before we put our foot down, there is intention. We notice. When the mindfulness is strong, when your mindfulness is continuous, before we bend, we notice intention, intending to bend. When we stretch our arms, there is intention before we stretch our arms. When our mindfulness is very good, when our mindfulness is not very good, not very strong, we can see the intention. So, yogis purposely they note intention. If you note intention before you lift your foot, that's enough, I think. Then go on noting, intending to lift. If you like to note, intending to lift, lifting, then putting down. If you practice 3 steps, lifting, pushing forward, and putting down, placing, intending to lift, lifting, then go ahead. Go ahead. Pushing forward, placing. In this way, you will be able to practice meditation. So some yogis they practice intending to lift, lifting, intending to put, putting, intending to place, placing. I think not easy. If you note place intending to move, you should not move your foot. You have to stop it. Your foot still going, but you are still noting here, intending. It's not the present moment you are watching. That's why before you move your foot, before you lift your foot, you can note intending, intention, then lifting, go ahead, pushing forward, and placing. That's enough. So if I want to summarize what I have explained here, very easy: appearing, noting, noticing. Please remember these 3 things. Porta, shooter, timyanda, tomsha, yejibi. A chet tomsha, tinsha, swa, techa, singu, pionaize, in Burmese. The same thing, appearing, then noting, rising, falling. Appearing, the rising, falling appear in the abdomen. Then yogis note rising, falling. Then noticing the inflating, deflating, or contracting, or expansion, upward movement, or downward movements. So when the mindfulness is getting better and better, not only the inflates and deflates, you will mention automatically, without thinking, how you notice, how you know the abdomen started rising, then how the rising movement finished. You will describe automatically. Then one thing I remember, when yogis report, you don't need to write it down on the paper. The whole day you apply your mindfulness. Mostly yogis remember what they have experienced. When we write down our experience on the paper, not everything is correct. Because when we write, what should I write? We think, these are the things I experienced. Then write it down. Then what should I know? What should I have experienced? Then I write it down. In this way, not all the writings is correct. Not all the writing is correct. So we cannot report everything what we have experienced. I think our yogis also may notice. After reporting, I forgot to tell something. This experience is very good. Now I forgot. Want to go and see the teacher again, want to report, but your time finished. All the yogis experienced. I also experienced when I reported. If you forget, never mind. Next day you can tell. You still have the experience because you know the rising, falling, other things from the 6 sense doors. Then some yogis, when they practice meditation, they keep the paper and ball pen beside them. Then they practice maybe rising, falling, sitting, touching. After a few minutes, then they pick up the paper, then write it down. Then keep it back. Then note rising, falling, and so on. After a few minutes, then they open their eyes, then pick it up, then write it down. That is practice. What do you think? Is it called practice meditation? I don't call it practice meditation. Practice meditation, we don't need to write while we are practicing. Just practice. So I think this is a studying the meditation. Study the meditation. That's why you write it down. Then keep it back. Then no rising, falling, checking, practicing. So please practice meditation. Do not study yet. When you finish your retreat, you can study. Then read the book. Like this. So now our yogis practice meditation. I don't say our yogis study meditation. Practice meditation. Okay. So that's enough for today. May you be well and happy. May you be able to practice meditation ardently and energetically. Then may you understand the dhamma clearly as they really are.